All right. I'd like to bring to order Randall Heights Area School District Special School Board meeting, date November 17, 2020, starting at 6 p.m. Stand for the pledge of allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, can I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Beaver?
Here.
Dr. Carter?
Dr. Carter mentioned he will not be able to make it due to a work conflict this year.
Mrs. Eisenhardt? Here. Mrs. Henry? Here. Mrs. Hume? Here. Mr. Sheets?
Here.
Mr. Reitman?
Here.
Mrs. Wallison? Here. Mr. Smith?
Here.
8 present.
Okay, item Roman numeral number 1, Board of Directors report. Can I have a motion to approve the item under the Board of Directors report?
So moved. Second.
Mr. Sheets. Okay, Mr. Potter, you're going to have a presentation for us regarding the updated health and safety plan, the review committee that got together over several meetings. Just an outcome of that plan, please.
Great, yes. If you don't mind, I'm going to stand up. I'm going to turn the light off just so you can see a little bit better. What I'd like to do this evening is walk through the work that the review committee put together and the outcomes and recommendations. And so to get started, we're going to talk this evening about the health and data plan data metrics. We're going to talk about the educational model in hybrid. We're going to talk about some of those ancillary supports like BCTC and athletics. And then finally, we'll go into the timeline aspects of how we're going to implement this process, or the recommendation to implement this process. So that being said, I'd like just to first thank all of the members that were on this committee. We had a great committee. It was a very divergent committee in terms of the actual members and the stakeholder representation, and a very divergent committee in terms of the perspectives that were on this committee. But in the end, I feel we were able to drive consensus and really came out with a plan that I think will maybe not make everyone completely happy, but will at least make it understandable and feel like everyone had some input into this and we got to a really good place. So 29 individuals on this, 25 working team members. We had BCTC support. We had someone from Caring Foundation on the mental health side. We had our medical partners from St. Luke's that were an awesome partner as we went through this, and we used them heavily through this process. And then, of course, our legal support team, which is through KKLL. Thanking the board before I even get started. I appreciate the board getting us to this point and saying, let's start a committee, let's relook at this, let's get the stakeholder input and buy-in for this. And again, that these committee members that devoted numerous hours and a lot of work into this process, I thank all these committee members because it was a lot of work. Just 2 meetings, but a lot of work to get to that point. So a huge thank you to all these committee members. So this was the process we used. As mentioned, the school board asked that we put together a committee. We had a lot of interest in that, and we tried to find that divergent thinking and that divergent stakeholders. So the first thing we did was a lot of pre-work with the committee. We asked them to put a belief survey together, share how they were feeling, share insights on what they thought about using data, what they thought about how we should be operating school, what they thought about BCTC, athletics, education plans, a whole bunch of different belief thought processes. So we could see, again, that diversity and where people were coming from. And then what we did after we did that was we pulled together all the different county health and safety plans, as well as some from the Lehigh County area, and had them read through and research all those county and health and safety plans, and each member developed their own plan. After that, the administrative team met, read through all these plans, and came up with a draft proposal. To do that, again, that was the first intersect that we worked with St. Luke's, and St. Luke's really helped guide that conversation for us as an admin team to get us to that point to develop that draft that we could at least have a starting ground as a committee. So our first committee meeting, we went through the goals, meeting norms. We reviewed all the survey results from the committee, from the staff survey that went out, from the family survey that went out. A lot of data to really mine and really understand as we were going to take that next step make decisions for the community. Then we looked at each individual plan and kind of that summarization of what's the draft plan to start as a talking point. Then we did breakout groups. We had small groups, 4 or 5 people in a group. And actually we used this room and the classrooms right here. And it had an opportunity for all the different stakeholders to have that voice. And I felt that was really important. Each person had to have a voice, and if we were in one large group, that wasn't going to happen. So we did breakout groups, had a lot of good idea generation. We got to a good place that first night. The second night we came back together, and again, we kind of massaged it using that advice from same groups again. We went back to them and said, okay, here's where we ended up. Let's talk this through a little bit, and they provided us some good guidance and some recommendations and support for what we finally presented to the committee on the last night, and that's where we reviewed the data metrics, and then the education plan, and then all those ancillary pieces that we'll talk about tonight. So that was the process used, and I think it's important for the board to understand that, and the community as well, so that you understand that this was truly a unique process where everyone had input into it, everyone was engaged, and it wasn't just a, here's the plan, you like it or not. This was really driven by communication and everyone's perspectives. So here's where, I think, again, sort of 3 surveys that went out. I think it's important to look at that survey data. So what did those surveys yield? So these 2 pie graphs over here are talking about the health and safety, as well as the data. So this one is the blue represents, it says, I believe we should follow guidance from medical experts to develop our education program. And then this one says, we should be creating a learning environment primarily based on parents' desire. And then this one, which is basically a 3/4 split, says that we should be developing a plan based on data metrics, and this one said it should be loosely based on data metrics. When you get into this chart, this really now starts to talk about which data sets do you use. And green, as illustrated up here, is using a mixture of county and local and school district data. Blue is just using the Department of Education county data, and then red would be just using the zip code data only. So as you can see, based off of this committee, we had some kind of consensus, but we still had some divergent thinking that was happening with our committee group. From the staff survey, again, when we look at that data set, this is, again, talking about using advice from medical experts versus the parent input. And this one from our staff is using the data. Should we use the data metrics? Should we use it loosely based on data metrics or disregard the data? So that gives you a perspective of what our staff perspectives were. Additionally, with our staff, same pie graph as you saw before. The green indicates a combination of local, county, and school district data. The blue is just the Department of Education or county data. The red would be the zip code data, and then this one is just looking at what's happening within our schools. So this gives you a flavor of what our staff feel. And then the final one that we asked our staff is, from an education perspective, which operation mode would you prefer to be in? As you can see, 52% of our staff are looking at the hybrid instruction model. 43% would, currently where we are right now, would be in a virtual instruction, and then we have a full face-to-face with a small sliver. From the family perspective, I think it's really important to highlight this piece of it. We had 673 responses, accounting for 1,100 students. That response rate is 80%. That is, when you look at statistics, a phenomenal response rate. What we did, it was a unique way the survey was set up so we could get accountability for each child. So if a family filled out the survey, they had to fill it out once for child 1 and then fill it out again for child 2. So that's how that was sent out. But what we were able to do out of that is then collate that data based off of building. And so that's what this information is. It's showing you based off of building and the preferred education model. And you can see here that full face-to-face is the leading desire from our families. The virtual is the second, that's orange. You can see the virtual is the second option, and then hybrid is the third. So as you can see, you're starting to pick up that there is a lot, even the survey, I mean, you have this to the staff survey, to the committee survey, you're already starting to feel that there's a lot of different feelings and a lot of different thought processes on this. So that was a challenge for the committee, admittedly, because how do you go from here to here? And I think we got to a pretty good spot. So the data metrics, just to kind of further illustrate that divergent thought process, and not just even at our local survey data, and I think we all know this, but if you look at it at a county or a state or a national level, there's divergent thinking that's happening. So at a county level, just to point out that divergent thinking, there's 50 plus counties that are in what the state is calling substantial. Out of those 50 counties, there's approximately 80% of those school districts that are going to be remaining in hybrid or full in-person instruction across the state. This was as of last week. It might have changed since that point, but it kind of illustrates to you that school districts, the challenge is that the Department of Education and the Department of Health are really leaving it up to, they keep saying it's local control. So as you can see, local control is driving a whole bunch of different plans. Even with the county, there's 18 different plans for 18 different school districts. You multiply that out by the 500 school districts across the Commonwealth, and this is the start. And then of course you have the conflicting guidance from all over the medical field too. So going on the medical field, with the local counties, there are 3 local counties that intersect Berks County that have Department of Health. Pennsylvania, or Berks County, sorry, does not have a Department of Health, but Montgomery does. And Montgomery just voted to close all schools from November 23rd to December 6th. One end of the spectrum. Conversely, on the other end of the spectrum, this is Bucks County State. Bucks County Department of unconditionally recommends not to change the model of instruction. And then Chester County is kind of in between there, and they're saying at this time Chester County is in support of Chester County schools remaining in their current instructional model. So again, even from the county Department of Health, you're seeing this divergent thought process. And so what we rely on, because we don't have a Department of Health, is our emergency services. And you can see the quote there, but basically they're saying there's not a nexus or a connection between the student cases that are coming into school and that spread happening within the school system. So that's kind of the background that we shared with the committee in terms of these divergent views that are out there, even from the county level health departments locally. And then this statement is really driven. There's so many research studies out there, and there's information from the state. There's clinical research studies done by universities that are out there, and it's all over the board. I've read tons of them, and I'm sure if someone wants to make the case that we should be in, you can go out and find a study. If someone wants to make the case that we should be completely virtual and the whole nation should be shut down, you can find a university-backed research study on that too. And that's basically what this statement is saying. The red is saying, some experts are saying we should be shut down at the national, at the state, and at the local level. Just shut everything down. There's others that are in the middle and saying the hybrid plan, phasing back instruction, maintaining social distance is the best thing. And then there's other plans that are saying there's not a spread, a community transmission spread in schools, so get everyone back in. Again, this divergent thought process that's out there. These are the cases from the Department of Health that were released November 12th. You can see by that the age range that's impacting our students is very minimal compared to the total number of cases. It's 7%. But then when you start looking at what the age range of our staff are, which is this group right here, you have basically 57% of the cases that are impacting what our staff ranges would be. So, we have to worry about both. We say we worry about the safety of our students and our staff, and that is absolutely critical. So it's something we just keep in mind, but I think it's statistics that it's important to look at as we make decisions and as we present this information this evening. So I highlighted this statement because this is something we've been sharing and focusing on. We focused with the committee as we went through this process. As of last week, the county school districts were all maintaining their plans of hybrid. So as our school district made that shift to go virtual, all the other school districts within the county that were in hybrid, there were 3 that were not, that had started virtual from the beginning of the school year and have remained that way. The ones that were remaining were all saying we're going to be steadfast, we're going to be staying in hybrid. That since has shifted. That landscape with the number of cases that are starting to escalate that landscape's starting to shift, and there's districts that have officially made that decision to move, and there's others that are contemplating that right now. So that's why I highlighted, because that is starting to morph and end itself a little bit as time progresses here. And unfortunately, as these cases begin to skyrocket right now, there's some more caution that's being taken from school districts, at least in Mercer County. From the committee perspective, again, each committee person had to develop their own plan. So as each person developed their own plan, I broke that data down, and I went through all the plans, and this is how the data broke down. 5 committee members used county level data to develop their unique plan. 9 committee members used local level data to develop their plan, and then 3 used a combination of the local and the county. So again, you can see this is going to be a little bit of a challenge. St. Luke's, they were phenomenal work. I can't say enough about their experts that they have on staff and their openness to work with us. We just pick up the phone, they allow us to share their personal cell phones with them, and we've been able to dialogue through this whole process like I outlined in the actual process of how we got here. But their heavy emphasis was placed on school district cases. They thought it was really important to do the contact tracing, and through that process of the contact tracing, evaluate where those cases are coming from. So if there's a student or a staff member that has the case, did it come from some kind of community event or some kind of family gathering, and then they became ill, or did that case happen with a transmission that happened within the school district setting? And then likewise, they said that using that contact tracing is really important to understand how you evaluate those cases then. So if you look at a case and it's a sibling in 2 buildings, the siblings, even from the Department of Health guidance, it kind of get counted as one because it's in the same house, it's a sibling. Whereas if you had a case in the elementary and a different case in the middle school, and that case and that transmission happened because of maybe it happened with a bus or some kind of other intersect that is under the school district control, that's a much deeper problem. I have to give our nursing staff, Mrs. Schrank and Mrs. Boder, a tremendous amount of credit. They have an ongoing running Excel sheet that tracks tons of data on each case. Whether that was a quarantine because maybe it was one of our staff members, the staff member's child had a cold, and so the doctor recommended the test, and so we had to put them in quarantine for a momentary part of time. Or a student had to go get a COVID test because they weren't sure if they were ill or actually had a COVID case. So we've tracked all that data. We track the contact tracing if there are cases, and we work with the Department of Health to figure out that contact tracing. There is a ton of work, and I feel really confident in this being St. Luke's guidance and the data that we have, that we look over and we track to ensure that we have controls over this. And then finally, they reviewed and supported the proposed plan, which I'm going to go into right now. So that's all the pre-work to get us there. This is the plan that we are presenting to the board this evening as part of this review committee process. And what I'd like to do here is don't focus on this one for a moment, just focus on this gray box. This gray box indicates what's going to happen if there are cases within a school building. Very different than how we're going to determine what's going to happen with a system-wide decision for our district. This is what's going to happen with a school building. And so the Department of Education came out with this table. We continue to use this table, and then of course we work with the Department of Health whenever there is a case. But essentially what it's saying, if over a 14-day period, if there's 2 to 4 students or staff in the same building, we would close that building for 5 to 7 days. And that guidance that the Department of Education put out continues to be fairly consistent with what the Department of Health is telling us when we actually get to a case. And so we have to do that one time. There was a first grade where there was a student case, and there was another situation that there was another case within the same day. It ended up not being a positive case, but out of precaution, we ended up closing that first grade classroom. Similarly, last 2 Fridays ago, there was a student in the high school that was identified as testing positive for COVID. And then that Wednesday, there was a staff member that was identified as positive. So if we would have been in school, we would have been shutting down the high school for a period of time. So this is what we use to steer the conversation relative to cases within an isolated building. Okay? This kind of operates independently of this. This is what we're going to use as a flow chart to make decisions. So the first one is looking at the county level data. And again, we spent a lot of time reviewing this as a committee, and we've spent a lot of time looking at this with St. Luke's as our health provider as they reviewed this for us. And so the first piece here is we're going to look at the Pennsylvania Department of Health statistics, as well as the CDC. This was recommended to us. It's called Indicators and Thresholds for Risk of Introduction and Transmission of COVID-19 in Schools. And it's a 5-column chart. The first 2 columns are operating in green. The middle 2 columns are what happens in yellow. And then the final column is red. So the difference between these two is that this CDC chart, while they're very similar, the CDC chart relies more heavily on a cumulative number of cases. So they look at a 2-week period and they add all those cases up. Whereas the Department of Health has been using an average over 2 weeks. So even though it gets a little confusing, it was recommended to us that we include both of those data points in there in our first level look at this. Ultimately, when you average or you add it cumulatively, it really comes down to the same number mathematically. But this is how we get to that point. So this is first level. So in the case of the county right now, we would be over that threshold of 100,000 or 100 cases per 100,000. We'd be over that threshold, so we go down to the next level. The second level is looking at the zip code data. And we spent a lot of time, we spent some time discussing zip code data. And talking about, do we use zip codes that weight one zip code like Topton or Mertztown, they're specific to just our school district, or do we just cumulatively use all of them? So what we ended was we're going to use the cumulative data of all the zip codes within the school district and use that average to give us our reading. So if the counties are substantial, again, we'll be using that zip code data, averaging it out of a 2-week rolling average, and then again, using those data metrics of 100 per 100,000 and a positivity rate of 10%. So that data is available on the Department of Health website. There is data sets that are available per zip code that you can easily pull. There's also a site that's out there that it's not an official site, but there is a site out there that will calculate the school district data and actually overlay the school district boundaries on top of all the zip codes, so you can see where the zip codes are, and it'll calculate for you what your rate of spread is, whether that's substantial or moderate, likewise. So those are the data factors we'd be using for the zip code. In the case of the zip code, right now where we are is 2 weeks ago we had 94 was our out of 100,000. Last week was 173 out of 100,000. So you average that 2 weeks together, we would be at 134 per 100,000. So if we were still operating in person in a hybrid, we'd say, well, this is over the 100,000. This is over the 100,000. So now we go into one further layer, and we start looking at what's happening within the school system, what's happening within the walls. We can control what's happening within the walls of our school district. If students bring it in, that's more of a concern. We can't control what's happening outside of it, but we can definitely control what's happening within the school system. Whether it's the cleaning, it's the social distance, it's the mask. And I feel really good about what we've been doing because of our staff, because our custodians have done a phenomenal job, because our paraprofessionals have helped us with the cleaning process, because our teachers have been phenomenal through this whole process. We have a safe environment. So what this third layer is saying is we're going to use the school district cases. And we're going to evaluate the school district cases. If there are cases within the school district, so if the county and local community cases are elevated, which is substantial, this would be substantial, this would be substantial, we'll use school district cases to evaluate the transmission. And then we're going to be using this table to help us get there and understand what these cases mean. So to make that decision then, we get to this final block, which is right at the bottom here. Well, the school administration and school board will make decisions on the education mode of operation after reviewing the county, zip code, and local building data. How's that going to happen? So the administration will consider instructional shifts to virtual remote learning if the county is substantial, if the school zip code data is substantial. And there's multiple unrelated cases. Again, that goes back to the family situation. Multiple unrelated cases in multiple school buildings so that we can react immediately to these situations. So if we get to this point where counties here, zip codes here, and we have cases, let's just say let's go back to that high school case where there's 2 in the high school, that's staff and that student. And let's just say, for sake of argument or example, that there is a case in the middle school in this building and there's a case in the elementary school. There's multiple cases throughout the school district. That's a concern. We need to take that very seriously. And so that's where this becomes almost like a snow day decision, where we need to make those immediate decisions, and we would close for a period of time. The district would close. So it would be for a week or a 2-week period. It would be a shorter amount of time, but it would be a time to buy us a little breathing room. Let's see how the dust settles. Difference, a little bit different here, where let's just use that same example, and is this exact time right now, and cases are rising, and we're using that same model of an example, and as a collective board, we say, you know what, we're not comfortable right now because cases are rising, the holidays are coming up. Let's reconvene and let's make a long-term educational plan decision and close and put us in remote learning until after the holidays. So that's the difference here in terms of being able to react really quickly, because if there's cases in the building, we can't spend the time to advertise a meeting, convene. We have to make those decisions immediately. Versus, let's precautionary, or we know there's cases rising. It makes sense to close until after the holidays. There is not a specific timeline put on this, admittedly, and the reason for that is we were in a position the first time when we got to 50 and said, you know what, we need to change this. We got to 100, we needed to change it. So there's not specific data metrics to this. We talked about that in the committee as well. I think if you put a specific timeline on this, there's so many variations. Let's just say it happens after Thanksgiving, and we make that decision to close. And you say it's a 2-week period. Well, does it really make sense to bring the kids back for 3 days before the Christmas holiday? No, it doesn't. So there's a lot of fluctuation and variation that can happen here, and that's where I think this has to be a little bit more organic, but it's all driven under the auspice of what's happening in the county, what's happening in the zip code, are there cases in the school district? If there's immediate cases, we shut down for a period of time. If there's long-term, this is getting really bad, the board reconvenes, we make a long-term decision for that. And that could be 2+ weeks, that could be until the end of the quarter, that could be until a natural break for the holiday, but we would reconvene, make those decisions. And then there's this last caveat that says the school district may close at any point based on unforeseen precipitating events for the safety of the students and staff. And when we met as a committee, we talked about, well, what happens if a church would have a whole bunch of COVID cases? And if the church has a whole bunch of COVID cases and it's in the community, that could be a major concern. It probably would make sense to just close the district for 5 days or something along those lines, just to put a buffer in there to make sure that spread doesn't happen within the school district. And so it's those sort of cases that this unforeseen event clause would be used. I just use that as an example because that's what came up in the committee. But it just gives us that opportunity to have that flexibility just in case something would happen. And I think you really need that because we're shifting the model and mindset a little bit. We're still relying on the data, but as we rely on the data and we drill down, we're going to get to a point where it's heavily focused on what's happening within the school district. And we want to make sure our students and staff are safe. That's, again, the most important thing. So that's the health and safety plan data metrics that the committee went through. Again, I kept emphasizing the importance of having this divergent group. When we got back together, I used a system where all the committee members could text in if they liked the plan or not. And in a live session, all of us sitting here, we could see this number go where it was going. And so we had 85% of the committee members that liked this plan, and 15% that were not as much in favor, and they wanted a little bit of a different plan. But when you look at a divergent group like that, I actually felt really good about this. We had a lot of good dialogue after that plan, after that survey was done. And I actually used that dialogue and all those conversations, and we jotted down a whole bunch of notes. And then that's how we made a couple modifications here from what I shared with the committee originally, but it was all driven based off of those comments of how are you going to make this decision, how are you going to react, and how are you going to, do you have to convene a board and, to make those immediate decisions. So those comments that were brought up in the committee is how we made some slight modifications to what was originally presented, but it was all based off that feedback. So again, I feel really good about this. I feel good about the committee's support of this. And I think it's a fair balance between, go back to the survey. The survey said we had a divergent group, right? We had a group that wanted just local, only school district. We had a divergent group that said just use the zip code, and we had a group that just said use the county. And I think this, as I said to the committee, I'm going to fall on the compromise sword here. I think this is a compromise. I think we get to a good point here of hearing everybody, still using data, and still focusing on the multiple layers of data to go through this. Admittedly, some people have pushed back and said, why don't you just get rid of the county and get rid of the zip code and only use what's happening in the school district? Because that's what you're making your decision on. And that's a fair statement. I can work with that and say, you know what, but if we were just focusing on this right here, when the administration or the school district, the school board would get back together to make a long-term decision, you'd be making your data decisions based off of this. By putting this plan together, you have data sets from the county, you have data sets from your zip code, and you have data sets from the local school district to make an informed decision. And I think that's the difference by some school districts have just drawn up a plan and said, we're going to remain hybrid and we're going to do this forever. This gives us multiple layers of information to make an informed decision. And I think that's really important. So, shifting gears, I'm going to keep going through here until the end. Education model. So we also listened to the feedback from the multiple board meetings and the feedback from people about what the hybrid plan looks like. So I'm going to share with you some of the hybrid model considerations. And this feedback came from our staff members as well as our parents as we went through this process. And we considered an alternate education plan. We shared this with the committee as we went through this. What's working well? In our hybrid plan, as it exists today, with a half day and a half day virtual, we were able to social distance. And we did that really well. By having only half the students, we can spread them out. Education with only half the students is really beneficial because you could focus in on just half the kids. Students have been very respectful about wearing masks. I really anticipated this to be an issue. I thought there might be a social statements made by not wearing the masks or by having something inappropriate on their mask. But that has, our students have been phenomenal. And there's cases here and there, admittedly, some kids that have it on their nose or some other situations that arise. But for the most part, kids have been really respectful. And then the cleaning process. Again, I give a lot of credit to our custodians and our paraprofessionals that have stepped up. And we have done a phenomenal job with cleaning, with disinfecting all the surfaces, and actually using disinfectant spray to get there and to clean our facilities. Concerns, one of the major concerns is that 15 minutes in the afternoon, particularly for our secondary education students. It's just, we thought it would be a good amount of time. It just ends up being too short of a time, and there's really not effective instruction that can occur in that shorter amount of time. So a call for more in-person teaching, which we heard throughout the school board meetings, and then a call for evaluating PCTC instruction. So what we presented is this plan. Kindergarten would remain the same in the current half-day program. That seemed to be working really well for the parents. It seemed to be working really well from our staff perspective. So that will remain the same moving forward. The 6 to 12 approach will change. So the 6 to 12 approach will be on Mondays and Tuesdays, cohort A will come in person for the full day versus just coming in for the half day, which they were before. They'll come in for the full day, and then the afternoon, the cohort B would be virtually following along in the classes all day long. So it kind of takes where we were with the hybrid with a half day in person, and then the other half of the kids were learning half day online. We switched to a virtual, and there's definitely struggles, but overall, I think it's working fairly well in terms of the virtual being effective, where you get a good block of instruction that's happening with the virtual learning. And so we're going to build on that and kind of implement this program where those kids get to come in for a full day, half the students, and the other half the students are following along. From an instructional practice standpoint, it'd be very similar to what we're doing now, where you teach them about 30 minutes, and then you have that 10 minutes or so to either do small group instruction or work with the students independently. And it gives that teacher that opportunity to connect with the students, whether that's in class or it's the virtual students. And it also gives our virtual students a little bit of a buffer break, so they're not sitting in front of the computer the entire time listening to instruction for the full day. So it's kind of finding that balance between the two. I feel really pretty good about this. When we get to Wednesdays, we're going to shift this a little bit, and the instruction will occur in the morning, and there'll be 30-minute blocks of virtual instruction. So again, building on that idea of more instruction, more deeper, rich instruction that will occur. So it's 30 minutes instead of the 15. And then in the afternoon, it would be independent work from the students. Teachers being able to connect with the students for independent work and support the kids as needed. And then Thursday and Friday, we just flip up the model, and of course, Thursday, cohort B would be in and cohort A would follow along. Lunches would be occurring for our students 6 to 12, and Mr. Green and Mr. Ginch have done a phenomenal job of mapping out the entire lunchroom. We can maintain 6 feet of distance, so when they're eating, they can take their masks down, eat. This isn't like a free-for-all when it's lunchtime, they can just take their mask off and unmask for the entire 30 minutes. But when they're eating, they take the mask off, they can eat, they put it back on when they're not eating, and we can maintain that distance within the lunchroom, and we'll still have the teachers monitoring the lunchroom, maybe not moving around quite as much because the kids will be unmasked, but they'll still be there monitoring the lunchroom during that time. First to 5th grade is a little bit of a different animal. And so, admittedly, I am not coming to the board this evening with a recommendation. I'd like to spend a little time evaluating this. I don't want to rush into a decision. I think it's really important to look at all the data facts that we have. So we'd like to come back to the board on December 7th for the recommendation. Some of the things we're thinking about is the schedules for students, the schedules for staff, the transportation. If you do a half-day program, you'd have to do a midday run for half the group of kids, and you'd have to do another midday run for the other half the group of kids. And so you probably have to divide your cohort up not by alphabet, by geographic area. And so that's going to change the cohorts. And then you're going to have the situation where we evaluated taking all the students on one bus and driving and dropping them off, and at the same time picking up other students. But if you do that, then you're mixing the cohorts of students and having a risk concern there. So a lot of things to evaluate in transportation as we look at this plan. Staff feedback, we did a survey with our staff already before we went into our final committee meeting. So we got a quick response from the staff of what they were feeling. And then from the committee, some of the feedback was, let's do a family survey as well. Again, let's not jump into this. Let's do a family survey and see what the family is looking at as well. So the family survey went out yesterday. If you are a parent of a 1st to 5th grader and you're following along tonight, please fill out that survey. Again, that was emailed last night. Similarly, we also looked at the food service program and a lot of nuances to figure out the food service. So the 2 options we came up with was doing a half-day model, which would be following similar to what our kindergarten students were. These are approximate times. The cohort A would come in half the day, 8:40 to 11:30. And then cohort B would come in from 12:30 to 3:30. And then in between there, we would be disinfecting the rooms with the spray and then trying to wipe down as many of the common areas, desks, door handles as possible in the buildings. So that would be the option 1 model. Understanding this is probably most challenging for parents to figure out childcare for half the day, every day. That's going to be really challenging on the parent side. Option 2 is for 1 to 5 to follow the 6 to 12 model, which would be full day in person, and then the other students following along virtually. So half the students in person, half the students following along virtually. And again, the challenge with that, and this is probably much easier for a parent to figure out childcare schedules. The challenge with this is a little bit harder for the teachers on the management side, especially 1st and 2nd graders or those younger ones, to be managing kids that were online, 6 and 7-year-olds, trying to follow along, as well as 6 and 7-year-olds in front of you. So that's a classroom management issue. And whatever decision we make here, we want to make sure it's the right decision. We want to make sure that it's the best for educationally for our students, and it's the best for the safety aspect. So there's a lot to consider here. We have a little bit more work to do to come up with a final recommendation, but these are the two options that we're looking at for that 1st to 5th grade cohort. Again, following along with what's 6 to 12, half the kids in, half the kids following along, or the other option would be kind of like kindergarten where they come in every day, but it would be just for half the day. Some of the things to consider when we adjust to a hybrid model is our bandwidth. So our bandwidth, we currently have 1 gigabyte coming in. We use about 600 to 750 megabytes a day on average. So if we were going to do this hybrid plan and be able to live stream all these students, we have to definitely consider our internet bandwidth. We're almost maxed out at this point, about 3/4 use. So we were able to upgrade our bandwidth to 2 gigabytes. That takes about approximately 2 months for completion. The nice part is the existing one comes in from Berks County Intermediate Unit from the Reading side. The other one will now come in from the Lehigh Valley side, which is really nice from the redundancy standpoint, because if something would happen, let's just say with Berks County line, we still would have the other line coming in from Lehigh. We would at least be able to maintain some of the internet capabilities. Technology also necessary to do this. We looking to purchase webcams to be used for live stream. That takes about 3 weeks to get in. And then professional development, just to get us to how do we use the webcams, how do we teach and manage kids that are remote as well as teach in person. And there's some good lessons learned by our colleagues that some school districts have already worked down this model. And we're working with those school districts to say what has worked well, what hasn't worked well. We had 2 teachers on the committee that are using this model, and so they provided some really good insight as well from the teacher perspective on how this can be done and implemented effectively. So some good professional development that's going to be going to get us there. And again, I talked about this earlier, but I think it's really important. So it's Wednesdays for our students, regardless of what program we pick 1st to 5th grade. Our Wednesdays for all our students, 1st to 12th grade, will be live, will be virtual. There will be live teaching sessions. The morning will be virtual instruction, and then the afternoon would be the independent work where the teacher can connect with students. And then the deep cleaning will be occurring on Wednesdays. That is definitely going to be a priority, because that will keep our 2 cohorts separate from the cleaning perspective. And then finally, the virtual academy, that will remain an option for students. The transition of semester is mid-January. We asked initially parents to make that semester decision. What we're also looking to do is evaluate, again, not ready for a recommendation, but we're evaluating if we make this shift with a hybrid change to a full day option where the kids are in person and the other cohort is following along, could students that are families that want that option of virtual, not necessarily do the virtual academy, but still be virtual and following along with that live synchronous instruction with the teacher. So some things to figure out there in terms of classroom management, touch points with kids, and how do we ensure that connection is happening, because right now, obviously, those hybrid kids will be coming every 2 days, and there's a good touch points. So some things to work out, and I'm not quite there yet, but again, with the recommendation, those 2 things are hanging out there. We will make sure we get back to you by December 7th. But definitely suggestions that came from the committee work, some really good decisions, discussion points, and things that we're definitely working on and evaluating right now. As we transition some of our ancillary programs to the education program is BCTC. So this just gives you, it shapes up what does our BCTC picture look like. So cohort A, east is the Olney campus and west is the Leesport campus. So there's 47 students that go Monday, Tuesday. In cohort B, there's 38 students. We have 62 that go to, in total 62 that go to Olney, and 23 that go to Leesport. Out of our student body, we have 85 students in the high school that attend BCTC, and out of that whole student body of 9 to 12, and it's worth noting that BCTC is primarily for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, but when you look at the entire student body, 9 to 12, it's 18.43% of our student body. We're actually the 2nd highest school district in the county that has BCTC population going to BCTC. So definitely something to consider. Our families and our students obviously value the importance of BCTC in the trades, and it's a great program for our families, and we want to make sure we're supportive and responsive to that. So what did our committee say, and what did our staff say? So when you look at this, The red says that we should have a different plan than a regular health and safety plan for our BCTC students. You can see pretty overwhelmingly from the committee and even our staff that they believe we should have a different program. So currently, the A to L goes Monday, Tuesday, and the Z goes Thursday, Friday. That's done to maintain the class sizes, balance, to maintain social distancing. The recommendation at this point is that we would transition, because we're in a precautionary type virtual learning right now. I would make the recommendation, and what I shared with the committee, what the committee agreed as we make a recommendation this evening, is that we permit BCTC students to attend BCTC starting as soon as this Thursday. What that will do is allow Thursday, Friday for our cohort B to go, and then Monday, Tuesday for cohort A to go before we get to the Thanksgiving, and then they equally get the same experiences before that Thanksgiving break. And we'll talk about timelines coming up, but that would be, that's a current recommendation for BCTCs to get that back in. We understand that the hands-on learning is critical for these students. And admittedly, the virtual learning is being done. So let me back up for a second. BCTC is set up by programs. There's a welding program, there's a culinary arts program, and each one of those is very unique and very different. And so, you know, there's a carpentry program, they're building houses. So some of the programs virtually are done very effectively. Some of them are a lot harder to manage and do remotely, like welding or carpentry. It's hard to build a house when you're not building the house. So that's why I think it's important to get our BCTC back. The one caveat here is if the school district would need to shift to remote learning. So we go back to that data metric. The data metrics say that there's cases that are happening throughout all our buildings. That means that things are really bad, right? And so at that point, we would pull back our BCTC for that amount of time, that remote learning amount of time. It wouldn't be that we would be remote learning for a long period of time, unless as a board we decided to go that direction. And then we could reevaluate BCTC at that point as well. But based off of that shorter term decision making, we want to pull BCTC back for that short amount of time, and then allow us to start back up as soon as we can get ourselves going. Extracurriculars and athletics is going to be very similar to what you just saw with BCTC. Here's the survey responses. Committee felt like there should be a different plan for athletics and extracurriculars. Staff, not so much. It'll be a little bit heavier on maintaining what the school district plan is. So kind of combining that and looking at what you saw with BCTC. This is what happened in the fall. So Mr. Geis has done a really nice job of keeping track of all the data metrics. There were 0 positive cases for our coaches or our students this fall in athletics. There were 2 teams that were quarantined. 5 athletes that were quarantined, 1 high school field hockey student, 1 high school boys soccer, 1 middle school boys soccer, and then 2 high school cheerleaders. The work that Mr. Geist and the athletic trainers and his office staff and all the coaches did to ensure that there was safety was outstanding. They came up with a layered approach. So layer 1 says, they're just going to practice for 60 minutes as an introduction back into sports. Make sure we can really ensure safety. Level 2 was, we'll then start ratcheting up and do 90 minutes. And then level 3 was, things are looking pretty good, we're getting routine, and it's going back to somewhat normalcy. So he put a really nice layered approach. In those layered approaches, level 1, level 2, level 3, it's broken out to have what's going to happen in each level. So sanitation stations for supplies, masks, disinfectants. All the students in any of these levels are all screened before every practice and every event. And so 3 to 4 students this fall were not permitted to practice because when they did temperature check, they had temperature, so they were not allowed to practice. So the temperature checks were working. It put a stopgap in place for a few students before they even engaged in athletics. And all these safety measures that Mr. Geis, like I said, the athletic trainers, his staff, did a phenomenal job of ensuring the safety of our students. And you can see that by what was done here by our data statistics. PIAA and BCIAA have not provided some hard, fast guidelines. There's some loose guidelines for individual sports on game days, but really not a lot of guidance coming from those agencies. So it's really left up to local control. That's how they're stating it. The winter season does officially begin November 20th. So the recommendations that Mr. Geist has worked through and we've shared with the committee was that we would continue to follow that athletic health and safety plan. That's critical. We absolutely have to do that. When we're into hybrid learning, we would permit the athletics and extracurriculars to occur. And extracurriculars is key to note here because as we go back full in person, the extracurriculars full in person can be occurring too. So juggling club, or clubs that we offer can occur because we have those opportunities as students are going to be in school for the full day. So this is not just athletics we're thinking about, this is extracurriculars. Spectators permitted on a social distance, and that's going to be also driven by what's happening at the state level with the masks and distancing and limiting the numbers that are around the facility. So the reentry plan that we would be coming up with, and I'm sorry, and again, we're going to continue to monitor the PIAA, PCI recommendations if there are any additional ones, and as well as cases that would be happening. So the reentry plan that would be developed would be, again, similar to BCTC, where we would, because we're in a precautionary stage right now, and there's not necessarily cases that are happening right here within the school system. November 20th to December 2nd would be this level 1 activity, which would be maximum activity duration is 60 minutes. We'd be doing temperature checks, put all those safety protocols in place. December 3rd to the 14th would be level 2 activities, which would be maximum duration is 90 minutes. And then games would tentatively at this point start on December 14th, but that is very contingent on what's going to happen with the cases and the county and the other school districts and decisions we're going to be making as a county for athletics, whether that's superintendents making decisions or the athletic directors making decisions on what's going to happen with games that are happening with the county. But at this point, that's a tentative timeline for level 1 and level 2 activities to begin. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to continue to monitor the data to we might have to adjust this plan accordingly. Finally, so last 2 slides, I promise we're almost done. The last 2 slides is timeline and summary. So I know you're going to look at this, but just bear with me for a second. In looking at some of the considerations for this calendar, we want to make sure that we're monitoring and being very mindful of the holidays, particularly with the current increases in COVID cases. That's really starting to bubble up right now. There's some sharp escalating trends with what's happening with COVID cases in the county, within the state. And so things happen at the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, we have to be really mindful of that. We also want to make sure we provide professional development time to ship the new hybrid plan. I talked about that earlier. And then allowing the time for technology to arrive and be installed. That's a big piece in terms of how do we implement this plan. Also, athletics and extracurriculars. We would, I outlined that plan to get them started November 19th for BCTC and November 20th for athletics. But they would be then operating under the new health and safety plan, which would take place January 11th. And they would fall under that guidance at that point. So if the school district closed because of cases, so would these 2 things. But for now, we're going to let them begin because, again, we're in that kind of precautionary stance. So this is the calendar. Up here is where we are right now. We would stay in remote learning in this pink through January 11th. And again, you have Thanksgiving in here, and then you have Christmas holiday in here, plus New Year's. So one of the plans we had talked about was staying remote until Thanksgiving, waiting a week after Thanksgiving, kind of let the dust settle after all the holiday breaks, and then you would have about 2.5 weeks where we could come back with something like the old hybrid. And then you would have Christmas break in here, winter break in here. Of course, everyone would be on top of each other for New Year's, so let's give it another week, and then we can start a new hybrid program. It seemed to be a lot of back and forth and not a smooth process. So in the end, we decided to recommend this plan in light of the holidays that are happening, in light of the different schedules bouncing. Let's have consistency with virtual learning through this stance. And then also with the COVID cases that are rising dramatically right now. I think the decisions the board had to make and were put into back on October 30th were extremely tough because there weren't as many cases locally. But now that we're in a situation where these cases are really starting to rise, we actually, I think, are ahead of the curve And as I mentioned earlier, there's other school districts that are starting to backtrack a little bit and reevaluate their plans. So I think we were in a good spot. And I think it makes a lot of sense here. Again, when you do that compromise of listening in and saying we want to do hybrid, but also saying, let's take the safe approach to this. I think it makes a lot of sense to maintain hybrid for the month of December, essentially. December. And then come back that January 11th with the new hybrid implemented at that point. We do have a board meeting January 4th. So that will give us the chance to look at the plans, look at the data, and say, you know what, things are still really escalated. We might have to push this off a little bit, or things are looking like they're trending in a good direction, and we feel comfortable opening on that January 11th. But that'll give us a good check and balance as a board to reevaluate this on that January 4th before we get to January 11th to implement the new hybrid plan. And again, that's when that new health and safety plan will take effect at that point too. So finally, just a thank you to all the community members that were and stakeholders that were involved in this process. There was a lot of time, a lot of divergent thinking, and I think we came up with a really good plan. I feel really good about presenting this to the board this evening because I think it provides the multiple perspectives of whether you wanted to use the county data or you wanted to use the local data, whether you wanted to have full virtual or you wanted to have a new hybrid plan. We've tried to accommodate and listen to all of those different views and come together this evening with a plan that I think meets all those different perspectives and puts still safety as a priority for our school districts. With that, Mr. Tomas, I'll turn it over to you for more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Very informative and
Sorry that was long.
It's okay. Broad and diverse, and really appreciate your time and effort into this plan. I'd like to turn to more discussion at this point in time. Discuss the plan. If you may have questions about, please feel free to create that conversation now.
And just publicly, I'd like to thank Mrs. Einhorn, Mr. Fonsi, Mr. Sheets, and Mr. Beaver. They were all part of the committee and really had a good input from the board perspective as well as the community perspective on this committee plan. So thank you to the four of you for engaging and devoting your time to this.
Is there anybody else who has comments or questions?
No, I don't.
Do you know, will there be support in the classroom for when they're live streaming?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Mr. Volker actually shared with me a multiple page document he's already drafted with his team of how we're going to put that support in place for the teachers.
I only do it short for each day, but I don't know how, especially the little sets you have to. It
Yeah.
can be, I do know that, how challenging it is to maintain little people in front of you and little people at home rolling around under a blanket. So just having that extra support to kind of, because sometimes you feel like as a teacher, you're stuck between the computer and the children that with you, so.
And so admittedly, what we're going, that's absolutely online, and that's why we didn't want to come to the board this evening with that 1 to 5 recommendation, because we still need to figure that out. 6 to 12, I feel really confident about.
Right.
Again, we had that whole professional development plan put together for that already. The 1 to 5, we're going to spend some time as an admin team looking at that, talking to the other school districts, and then we're going to pull some of our staff members together as well, so we can get their input into it and really work through all the different angles of this. And again, we're going to be in the same position. We're going to have two divergent, whether it's a parent struggle, which is very real, or it's a teacher struggle on the academic side, which is very real as well. Trying to put those two things together.
Initially, but I think, I haven't lived it, and like I said, I only do it a short period each day, but I like it now.
Okay.
At first, I was like, oh my goodness, but, I feel like I was trying to share that with Mr. Volker, like, it's been a good, team building, rapport between the two cohorts. So they get to see each other, they're very excited, they engage a little bit, but, so that's been nice to sort of establish that family that if we ever get back together as a whole group, they've kind of seen each other every day already.
I really appreciate that. We might just be
And I think we got that feedback from two of the teachers that were on from other districts within Berks County that had some really unique perspectives regarding where they are and initially being excited that they could
It's
have.
very intimidating because
Right.
you not only have the students watching you, but everybody that's in the house, and then they have, social media, oh my gosh, can you believe they said that? And that is very intimidating, it's very real, and, but I know that I'm doing what's right for my kids, and I personally was able to pass, but it's gonna be hard for people, I lived that, so I know. But I do like it now.
That's good, honestly, that's great feedback, it's really.
One thing that I would ask, I've heard this concern from several parents, in the virtual model, or the hybrid model for that matter, is it possible for the attendance email to go out in the morning as opposed to 4 o'clock at night? Because the concern that I've heard is that if their student doesn't show up for school, if we were full in person, they would know instantly that their child had attended. So that was the one concern. The other concern was, as far as assignments, if that could be a request on the teacher side, if assignments aren't being met, for that to be more real time as opposed to accumulative at the end of the week.
You
So,
can sign up for daily.
correct, but as far as at the end of the week, say the teacher says, your student has completed, 5 assignments. Is that something that can be done on a regular basis? Those are some of the concerns, and I had heard.
Yeah, the attendance ones being, I think maybe I just need to figure out that, what the ask is with that signing. I know the Google setting allows you to choose the weekly or the daily, and maybe they're set up as a weekly, or maybe I'm just misunderstanding.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll connect on that, absolutely.
Okay, so, no surprise, Liz has a lot. And I'm struggling to try and figure out the best way to kind of work through the variety of questions I have and the variety of comments I'd like to share. The first thing that I want to do is thank members of the committee. Again, I think it might have been you, Mr. Sheets, who way back on October 30th suggested this committee model. I think the board members heard me call it a BHAG. This goes, I gave myself a big, hairy, audacious goal to try and rework an entire model like this in a 2-week time frame with such a diverse group of people and with such disparate views in such a heightened emotional environment. So great job to the committee. Thank you for all involved. Really good work. I think if we look at how did we get here, this might be at least the third, if not the fourth, board meeting that's been called rather urgently, or in which we had significant community input and appeal for us to reevaluate some things. So again, one of the most important things I want to say is, as it relates to there are sections of this document, right? So as it relates to the hybrid learning model, I am in full support of that section of this plan. Through all of these various board meetings, this board heard huge amounts of feedback. We also got bombarded, if you will, with email. Rarely do we ever get so much community input and such passionate and urgent pleas for our attention and for folks' voices to be heard. A lot of what was said was that children are struggling, families are struggling, and they're overwhelmed. And they gave us lots of specific examples of what wasn't working. They also shared, frankly, a lot about what was working, so that was also great to hear. So the committee took the good stuff and felt good about that, and then proactively addressed some of the challenges that they were hearing from people. So I'm super appreciative of that. I think many, many people will be appreciative of that, and this really, that section of this plan really hits a lot of those marks. So if the agenda items were segregated into individual pieces, rather than one big lump sum motion, I would easily be able to put my personal support behind that hybrid model. So that's that. The second thing I fully support is the timeline piece. So the committee's recommendation to not do yet again another whiplash, if you will, or flip-flop, or just change, however you want to position it, between now and the end of the holiday season. So setting a stake in the ground that buys us until the end of the first week of January to stay in virtual mode. I'm comfortable with that. I'm also hearing feedback from the community. Many people are finding themselves surprised at how well the full virtual model is going, because their children are getting, for many of the reasons that you said here, their children are getting more time with their teachers, they're getting into a rhythm, all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, I am certainly hearing that there are some children that totally are struggling. And so again, I just urge those families who have kids that are not doing well in a fully virtual model not to suffer through alone. I urge you to please continue, if you have been, or start reaching out to your teacher, your child's building principals, the administrators here, the senior staff of this organization. These are people who absolutely can help navigate. Having said that, it is not easy. There is no silver bullet for this situation. We are in a crummy, crappy pandemic, and we have been for months, and we will continue to be, sadly, unfortunately, disparagingly, continue to be in that pandemic environment for a good long time. There is hope. I think we're all hearing some tidbits of hopefulness around the vaccine. It's months away. It's not coming today or tomorrow or by Christmas. Despite the fact that what some of us might want or might want to believe, but it is on the horizon. There is certainly hopeful information. Personally, I'm disappointed that on our board we have 8 people here and the 9th member was not able to attend. He's a medical doctor, and I personally value his medical and scientific opinions and thoughts on this. So, yeah, okay, sorry. I think of dentist, doctor, went to school for a long time. Yeah, for a long time to become a medical professional with a big fancy degree after his name. And a title in front of it, which I don't think anybody else around this table can claim. So I'm sad that Dr. Carter isn't able to be with us. I really think that his opinions in this realm would be pertinent and valuable. But back to the vaccine is coming. But I think this is really going to be a tough time. So families, if we're going to stay in virtual until January 11th at least, please reach out if you need help. There's counselors, there's interventionists, there's all sorts of support that you and your kids can get. So those are the things that I feel really good about. I'm trying to work through how do I share some of my feedback on some of the stuff that I still am having trouble getting behind. And frankly, at some point, if there's 7 of you around this table that would say yes to this now, then I may be wasting everyone's time. I would ask you to entertain me. I may not be able to convince you, but I feel like I owe it to myself and the community members who have taken the time to write and to appeal, that I share my own personal views the same way that I read every single email and listened to every conversation that has occurred over hours and hours and hours of board meeting time over the last 3 or so weeks. So I appreciate your indulgence. Maybe a way to do it would be if we could go through the slides. I fundamentally disagree with the claim that right now, the model that we're in is a precautionary measure. I challenge that statement because the way we got here into full virtual mode is based on a very thoughtful strategic plan that started being developed back in the summertime, that was presented to this board in August and reviewed again in September and reviewed again in October and reviewed again in November. The data got us here. We are not in full virtual because we're being precautionary. We're in full virtual today because our plan told us to go virtual. So that's just kind of a general statement. So if we go to the data, and the committee believes we talked about how many people thought we should use a combination of data. And I appreciate that the board was open to reevaluating what data points we were using. One of the questions I have about the combo of data is where we landed was sort of a workflow. You start at the county level, and if the county level data based on PDE and Pennsylvania Department of Health puts us in substantial, it's risk, by the way, substantial risk is what that phrase really means. Then we flow to looking more locally, and then we flow to looking even more granularly in our own buildings. Was there any discussion in the committee about combining the data rather than looking at one and then having it triggered looking at another, and then if it's bad again, having that triggered looking at a third and yet fourth? In other words, was there discussion about looking at all of the data points and maybe weighting them? You know, county would be 25%, local would be 25%, something like that.
There was a
And
conversation
so can you
regarding that,
talk
but
about how
but
you got yourself out of that?
yeah, there was conversation regarding that. However, the reality is that, you know, from a database solution that everybody in the committee kind of wanted to have, weighting is completely arbitrary. So it was the same conversation that we had, you know, basing it on a radius versus county, you know, school district, and then building kind of level information. Any number that we came up with would have been 100% arbitrary. Just pluck a 10 out of the air, pluck a 5 out of the air, right? So the reality was, we said, okay, well, let's take a look at this. There was an hour and a half long conversation about it. It moved back around. This was what the committee agreed on. They said, you know what, instead of going with arbitrary, we're just going to go with the straight numbers from the county, straight number from the zip code, and then the straight numbers from the school districts or the actual school buildings. And then we're going to drop it back on the board to take those 3 numbers and identify if there's something that's urgently going on or something that we do need to be precautionary about. Case in point, the example of the church having an outbreak, right? That would be something where it's set up to look like a workflow, but each one of those data points can be used individually. So if we have a church issue where they have 100 new cases from a church, and we know that 60 of the kids go to our school, well, that would be a second tier issue, but we would still then say, okay, you know what, we probably need to shut down school for 5 to 7 days to make sure that this clears out. But that would be a conversation, once again, that we would have at this level.
I mean, you use the word arbitrary, and I scratched my head a little bit. Frankly, our initial numbers were arbitrary. We started with a number of 10 cases per 100,000 at the county level. That was back in August, I believe. Then we moved to 50, and then we moved to 100. And when I say started there was discussion there. I don't think our plan ever reflected 10. Our first plan reflected 50, correct?
We reflected 10 for full, less than 10 to be fully in school.
Right.
50 would have been the cutoff to send the full virtual. And then we received,
guidance,
yeah, then we received guidance from the state saying
evaluating
100.
Evaluating these plans over and over, we've gotten more guidance as we've done that.
Right.
In the beginning, one of your statements was in July or August, we put the plan, and then we reviewed it and reviewed it. We didn't necessarily amend plans other than the one time we amended numbers. And now we're looking to amend the plan. Like when we put this plan in place over the summer, the only thing that was ever changed were the numbers. Isn't that correct?
For one number.
The number part, yeah. So when you just, a few minutes ago, you said, we keep evaluating this plan and it should change it, but nothing has been changed except for the one time we changed those numbers. Isn't that what you brought up?
Yeah, that's
You said in October, we met to change it, in November, we met to change it, but we only.
Switch the word change to discuss, to evaluate, to revise. So again, it's not a debate about.
Revise anything else, is we only revised the number one time. This is the first time we've really ever revised the plan model.
Yeah, but in the beginning, to Liz's point, the number is what switched us from model to model. I mean, without the numbers, there was no plan. So what Liz is basically saying, we switched the number, so we didn't switch the plan of moving from either hybrid to red to green to whatever color you want to call it.
Yeah.
That's your point, right, Liz?
Correct.
And we switched the numbers based on when we got guidance, because then PDE and the health department actually came out and provided us real numbers, so we changed based on those numbers. So it wasn't the professional.
The first numbers 50 was given to us by St. Luke's, our healthcare provider, our trainers. The number 100 was already there. We chose not to use it. The state had already put it out. It was there. We chose not to use it. Then we went to switch because the number was too low. Everybody agreed, let's move it to 100. Then new guidance came out by St. Luke's and Penn State and whoever else we used at that point. Ultimately, all these healthcare professionals are just like us. They pretty much don't have a clue either. You know, we're stuck in a situation here. It's a pandemic no one's ever seen, and you know, since what, August, us 9 have been asked to be healthcare professionals, epidemiologists, whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean? I mean, nobody really knows what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen with, you know, kids with COVID and combine the flu. You don't know what's going to happen. So this is all new to everyone.
You didn't even know what epidemiology was 6 months ago.
You don't
So thank you for that, and really my point, I didn't mean to get, down a rat hole about certain 10, 51. My point really was that our number of 100 was not fully arbitrary, but it was just a number we hung our hat on at the time. As we talk about following professional guidance, I really struggle because the professional guidance coming from the Pennsylvania Department of Education said that when your county is in substantial risk, as Berks County has been for well over 5 weeks, that we should seriously consider virtual. Likewise, the Pennsylvania Department of Health says the same thing. So we're in good company. I don't know if that's a good thing or just lemmings going over a hill. We'll find out someday. That school districts in Berks County, by and large, are choosing to actively ignore that guidance. The state has the PDE and DOH have empowered us to ignore it if we feel like we really know better than they do. But we are actively ignoring that guidance. And it reassures me to know that while we stay in virtual through the holidays, which is predicted by all of the experts, I don't think there's many people at all who are saying it is not going to get worse before it's going to get better. In other words, it will get worse before it gets better through the holidays. It reassures me at some level that this plan keeps us in virtual and buys us some time.
I don't think we're necessarily ignoring it because we're using Dr. Reed. I mean, we conversed with her I mean, she sat through a meeting for us, and we've talked to her many times, and they have seen our plan and are in agreement for it, and support us, and have given us a lot of guidelines here. I think saying we're ignoring it is a hurtful statement for all the work that we put in talking to them over this stuff.
Well, I think that the key here is that we're still using data, which is different than a lot of other district plans that committee members, you know, that you read through. A lot of them just say, we're gonna be in a certain education model, and that's it. There's not statistics put to it.
Yeah.
I think we are probably one of the richest in terms of process.
I would agree.
Yeah, after seeing what they would do, some of it is like, no plan, we're just gonna do what we
Well,
said.
it's just a philosophy. A lot of districts just have a philosophy.
A lot of districts have done.
Or they,
That's the way we've always done it.
or the board
And
has given the power to the administration, they've given up their right to even
I would say.
have a say.
And I think one of the things is in the current environment of things, you know, semantics have meaning, right? Words have meanings. So when the statement comes out that we're ignoring things, we're not ignoring things. What we're doing is we're doing the best possible thing that we can do by trying to culminate this different stuff. Because to be honest with you, the Department of Health and the Department of Education have left us hanging high and dry. Pretty much Dr. Levine, Governor Wolf, they have washed their hands of these decision processes, and they have dropped it firmly in our lap where we don't have access to the same resources that they do. So saying that we're ignoring something, I mean, and forgive me for being a little bit upset here, but it's almost inflammatory when it says that. You know, kind of similar to like the precautionary statement earlier. This is a precautionary measure. We are in a precautionary step. We're precautionarily closing the school or putting the school fully virtual because our data set says that this is a precaution we need to take to make sure that we don't have any more community infection.
So we agree on what you just said there. So-
Correct,
so if you
but
want
the way you're kind of wording some of the statements, it doesn't really necessarily sound like that.
Well, again, interpret it how you want. I would ask you to keep in mind my intention is not to inflame you or to offend you in any way.
Okay.
My interpretation, when PDE and DOH say our recommendation is to go virtual when your county is in substantial risk and we've been there for 5 months and we've consciously chosen not to do that, then I paraphrase my interpretation of, yep, we've ignored your recommendation. If you want to package it a different way, that's okay. To me, it's not productive to debate about that.
Okay, see, that's condescending in the statement.
That's how we get these emails sent then by you saying that we're all ganging up and not working together. Of statements like that.
No, I totally disagree.
But if
I
you're-
completely
But if
disagree
you're
with that
allowed to
one.
be the only voice and not allow us to feel say how I don't feel that we're ignoring things, you just say we're ignoring it, and I would say that I don't think we are, then that's.
I didn't say don't say what you feel. I asked you not to find my comment offensive to you. So
Well,
at some point, if you're gonna choose to be offended by what I say, I'll take that under advisement. I'll share with you that's certainly not my intention. But at some point, you're gonna feel what you feel, no matter how I package it or spin it. You are equally entitled to say how you feel as well.
That's
And
fine.
please do.
We have to be able to, in an open forum like this, draw out points so that your thoughts and feelings aren't felt by the community and live stream right now, so many people are listening, that's how we all feel. So when you have all these statements, we have a chance to put our thoughts in as well. I don't,
Please do.
you know, that's how you feel, and I respect your thoughts and your contribution here, so.
Likewise. Okay. Would it be okay if I go on? All right, next point, question about the data. So just to clarify, the blue flag on the left says zip code data. Under number 3, it says if county and local community cases. Do we mean if county data and zip code data are elevated?
That's correct.
Okay. And our definition of elevated, when we look at zip code data, is what?
Substantial. That's why that's in parentheses.
Well, what's the definition of substantial? What is the metric?
Right, it's listed right there. Data metrics utilize the cases per 100,000, and and it's listed in both county and zip code.
I'm on the third one, Mr. Potter, I'm sorry.
Right.
So under number 3, it says if county and zip code data are elevated as substantial. So how many cases per 100,000? For both county it's 100 and for zip code it's 100, correct?
So when you take county, that's back up here, here's county. Here's the data metric right here. And then when you take local community, that's a zip code, the data metric's listed right here. So if the data metric is this, the data metric is this, and so if both of those data metrics are substantial, then we go into the next years.
So,
Do you want to know the number?
yeah. Is it 100? Is it 200? Is it 500? What gets us to substantial when we're looking at zip code data?
The 100 per 100,000.
Okay, so for county, we're staying with 100, which is a benchmark we felt comfortable with for a long time. As we start looking at zip code data, our benchmark will be 100 as well, cases per 100,000.
So the difference here is that the CDC indicators, as I mentioned earlier, that's a cumulative number. It's an addition of 2 weeks. So that is based off of 200, but the Department of Health is 100 per 100,000, a 2-week rolling average. So it's still, again, comes out basically the same, but it's 100 per 100,000. I just want to clarify that.
Were you asking about number 3? Because number 3 for the school district cases, we kick over to the blue box on the right.
I understand that, that's
Okay.
not, yeah, thank you, but not my question. I was just trying to clarify, under number 3, we reference local and community cases. Is it reasonable for me to assume that that language is pointing us back to the zip code data?
It is.
Okay, so local/community, AKA, also known as zip code data.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So if we're just using different language, and if, again, all of us and all of the community members need to understand this, it may be helpful to keep that language consistent. So if county data is substantial, if zip code data is substantial, then we move to looking at cases in our building. Got it, okay, we follow the chart, got it, thank you. What happens if, and this might not ever happen, and perhaps it's a silly hypothetical, but what happens if county data at some point gets good and gets out of substantial or improves dramatically, but we have a terrible outbreak locally? So in this flow chart, we start with county.
Yep.
If county isn't substantial, then this makes me think we would stop.
Right.
But what if locally, our zip code data is still through the roof, which it is currently, by the way. I think it's probably a good idea to state, based on today's data, where would we be if we adopted this plan?
Yeah, that's what I said earlier with this number. So cumulative right now, we'd be at 134.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is
I did mention that.
30% higher than what I think we're saying makes us comfortable.
So there's 2 things at play here. One is if it's a school-wide case, you still have this statement. I know it's hidden because of this. Anyway, you have this that says we may close at any time based on unforeseen incidents. So if the zip code is high and there's a bunch of cases in the school, we can still close. It doesn't have to necessarily be reliant. I think Mr. Sheets, that's what you were trying to explain earlier. Even though it's a flow process, one of these can be taken independently if necessary. Likewise, county's great. You could even have a zip code that's great, but we have for some reason 2 cases in a building, we would still shut down that building. That's completely independent of what happens in a building versus what's a systematic decision-making process.
Okay, good. I appreciate that, and I think that makes sense. I just wanted to be clear that if we talk about following the flow chart, we really don't, we're not locked into following the flow chart literally. We can skip around if we feel the need. That's what you're saying.
And honestly, that's why, while this is still driven in data, there's flexibility here because we got jammed up, the debate and conversation we just had about how that whole timeline happened. We got put against the wall with 50, we got put against the wall with 100. This gives us flexibility to still use data, but be able to adjust to, I think Mr. Beaver, you said it great, we don't know where this is going to go. And we need to have some of that flexibility to be a dynamic decision-making body. And that's what this is doing.
Okay. Early on in our discussion several months ago, we spent a lot of time talking about, lead time. And that at some point, the board was feeling like we shouldn't whiplash parents. And that because of daycare reasons and because of work schedules, same thing with staff, that it's not really fair to a teacher to, flip-flop all around without some lead time. I think how I interpret this, and so I'm looking for clarification, or correct me if you interpret it differently, we're abandoning that a little bit to suggest that while that's not ideal to be constantly changing, the data and our process, our protocol may require us to, with far less notice than what we might think is ideal, to flip-flop things around.
That's definitely one of the downsides of this plan.
Okay.
That it would have to be decisions that are made on a very quick basis.
Okay.
Versus what we had before. So that is one of the downsides to your point.
Okay. And that's the case as we get bad news, if you will. If cases continue to surge and we have to pull kids out of school. Is that also the case on the other side? So think about March and, January and February and March. Hopefully as vaccines become available to more of the masses, is it our intention that we would just as quickly move back in, or is it the board's thinking that there would be more of a runway for that?
So we actually spent a lot of time looking specifically at how these words were placed, and some of them are focused directly on what do we do in the worst case scenario of moving to virtual. But others are more taken so we can look at this and say, well, how do we go the opposite direction? And in fact, Mr. Volkers would challenge me on my thinking on that to say, make sure your wording has us going the other direction too when we get there. So, I think when we get to that point, when we can reopen ourselves back up throughout this school year, it would be just a reactionary, let's start back up. It would be taking into effect the county, the zip code, and what's happening with the school. Things are looking pretty good. We have a runway that starts to say, these things are starting to clear up, and we have that conversation with the board.
Okay.
That's that long-term decision-making plan right here.
Right. And I wonder, I think it was commented a little bit ago that what other schools are doing, we may be a little more data intensive than many of our peers, which makes some of us pretty comfortable. This notion, I'm curious, those schools that aren't data intensive, and I think the comment was they just empower the administration to make those decisions. I wonder if over the coming weeks and months, if we can ask that a standing agenda item on the school board agenda be an update on our pandemic status, if you will, our COVID status. I'm not quite sure how to label it. But basically a review of, over the past month since the last board meeting, this is what the numbers look like, this is what our case data looks like, this is what competitive school districts are doing, this is what the state is saying. This is sort of a state of the union, and this is the administrative recommendation based on that. So that we don't have to continue to call these special board meetings based on community outcry or based on a handful of board members saying, I think it's time we get together and talk about this again. Would it be an acceptable recommendation to suggest that maybe we could ask for a proactive formal briefing at least once a month in the public domain, so that not just us, but anyone in the community can understand where we are and what your meaning the administrative recommendation is to the board?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that. And additionally, we will continue to be transparent with our data, and we have the cases, all the district cases listed by week on the district website, as well as the data metrics that are occurring now. Previously was the 4-week rolling average, but we will be updating that to reflect this plan if this is approved this evening. And again, be completely transparent. I'll be updating on every Friday, so any community member can see that.
Okay.
And we'll continue to do that.
For the benefit of folks, I don't know if there are folks watching or how many, if there's a lot, would you be willing to just tell us what page, tell everybody what page of the
Yeah.
website that is?
What I've done before is we've just sent that link out when we did updates with these plans. So I can do
That's
that.
fine.
Yeah, we just sent that out.
Okay, great. Okay. All right, thank you. We can move into hybrid model. Just a couple of quick questions because I've already expressed my support of that. Where it says hybrid educational plan K through 12, my sheet doesn't have page numbers, so I apologize, Tom or whoever's driving.
This one?
Yep. Yeah, so, we talked about lunch just real briefly, when you were talking about if the kids are in school full day, now we've got to feed them, right? So Dr. Levine, the head of the Department of Health for Pennsylvania, today had a news conference at 1 p.m. And I don't know if anybody more articulate than I on this topic would care to share what the two big takeaways I took from it was travel restrictions and mask wearing. And very strong, clear directive about mask wearing everywhere you go outside your home. And in some cases, frankly, I think they encouraged even mask wearing in the home. But everywhere you go outside the home. So we've all along had a policy and an expectation that our staff and our students always wear their masks. As we go into a model where we would have kids in school all day long and be feeding them lunch, it sounds like you guys have a lot worked out in terms of spacing and all that, but there is a strange enforcement issue there.
So I read the executive order already. That was sent out. On the both ends of that, the travel and the mask, and there are specific things in there for the school districts to follow.
Okay.
So there's some
Got it.
ability to be able to help us do that.
Great, okay.
In the elementary and we have had lunch. They have had been eating lunch already, when they were and they were, all the tables, just what they eat, everyone.
Yep. And 6 feet apart and all that good stuff too. Yeah, great, okay. Mr. Volker, if you would flip to the one that says educational model adjustments to hybrid. I think, yep, okay. Down the bottom here, Mr. Potter, you made a comment about the virtual academy.
Yeah.
And this notion of, if we stay virtual, right now, we've got our kids who are, receiving instruction remotely from their teacher. If in January we go back to hybrid, and a family does not feel safe and chooses to not send their child back into our building, those students have an option to pick the Brandywine Virtual Academy. I think you mentioned that you're looking at ways that maybe some of those students, instead of switching away from their current curriculum and their current Brandywine teacher, could perhaps stay remote, yet still fully receiving instruction from Brandywine staff.
That was one of the recommendations from the committee. We like that, we need a little bit of idea, we need some time to flush that out, and we'll come back to the board with that recommendation.
Okay, all right. For whatever it's worth, I think that would be a really good thing, but particularly for those kids. It also gives families the flexibility of if they don't feel safe, they don't have to put their kids in early January through the ringer of a major switch as they would flip to the virtual academy. Not that that's not a great option, but okay, thank you for that. Okay, BCTC. Tom?
Actually, I have control of it.
Oh, you are magic in so many ways. Okay, so I fully support BCTC kids getting back into the BCTC hands-on labs and buildings immediately. So I fully support and can get behind and would say yes, again, if it were broken out as an individual voting option to that. So great job. I'm a little bit confused about if we go virtual in January, meaning it's Brandywine District, could we not develop a way to enable BCTC kids to stay virtual with Brandywine in the morning or whatever, however they engage with us today, and then go in person to BCTC if BCTC is open?
So we have two things going on. If there are cases at BCTC looks at it by program. And so they close a program, in fact, they recently had to do this, and then they identify the students and then they quarantine those students. So those students that would be attending BCTC and going to, let's just say, the culinary program, would be quarantined and not then intersecting with our students back in the buildings and spreading that. Conversely, if we flip-flop the model and said, go back to this flow chart, if we get to the point when we are virtual, that means that there are cases that are happening throughout our school district. Things have gotten pretty bad. At that point, that's when we say, we need to shut down, but we also don't want to be carrying or potentially spreading it into BCTC. So that's why we would say BCTC would be remote for that period of time. Again, the idea here is that it would be a shorter amount of time, and allow kind of the dust to settle and go back into school in a more expedited fashion. If it would be a longer, prolonged absence, again, the board would make that decision. And we can always then tag on BCTC to say, you know what, we're going to be prolonged until after Christmas. Let's continue having BCTC attendance.
Okay.
But that short-term decision making, I think it's important to protect students at BCTC as well, because we're making that decision that it's not safe to have school. So, because we have cases throughout the school system.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. We can cross that bridge when we come to it, I suppose. But I think that there might be a way that if a BCTC student was only engaging with Brandywine remotely, then I feel like we might be overreaching in suggesting that they can't then go to BCTC if BCTC would welcome them. I'll put that out there.
Okay.
Something
I agree with that. I agree with that 100%, because there's no transmission rate from here to there if they're not coming here.
Right, bingo.
But we
That's
would
right.
have shut down because there's cases in the school. That means the kids were in the school right before we shut down.
Correct, that's a different story, but if we get through all the other things and, you know, whether the county's substantial, blah, 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 you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Currently like we are right now.
Yeah.
And we're talking about sending them back.
Yep.
And the cases are through the roof.
Yeah.
There's no transmission rate from us to BCTC if they're not here.
Correct, I agree.
So, I agree with what Liz is saying. When we get to this new model, regardless if we're in red, if they are not here, there is no transmission rate to take there. So they should be able to go regardless. I mean, for me,
Picture it January 12th. We've been virtual all this time, not because, I mean, you're saying we're precautionary virtual, right? So on January 12th, if we move hybrid, but a BCTC family chooses to stay virtual, then that BCTC student is only engaged in our district remotely, right?
right, yes. If we have that remote option for those kids, they wouldn't necessarily, you know what I'm saying? With that.
So let's just say we use the calendar here as an example. Let's say we go through the school, we're back in, everything's hunky-dory, and January 28th, we have to close because there's a lot of cases that are happening within the school, right? That means that BCTC kids have been in school, have been exposed to all those cases, just like all the other students. That's why we're shutting down, because there's cases that are happening throughout our school system.
Yes, I agree with you that.
Okay.
I agree with you that.
So that's my point.
I think what
Shut
Liz
down.
was saying though is if we find a way where we have teachers that are staying home and teaching virtually, and that BCTC students do that and never come back and truly take the remote learning option if we provide that.
Got it. I see what you're saying. Sorry, I wasn't following. So it's just the remote learning
You correct. Now, if they come back and we have cases, yeah, obviously you can't send them. But if they're remote and they stay remote, there's no transmission rate.
Understood.
Right.
Understood. Okay, fair enough. Good point.
Something to think about.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Bieber, for helping me clarify. Okay, so I think we can move on to athletics and extracurriculars. Thank you again, everybody, for indulging all my questions. This is the downside of not letting Liz on the committee where she can air out all her thoughts. So thank you for that. Okay, so layered, the bullet point, layered reentry, I think is the language. There it is, layered approach to reentry. So congratulations, Mr. Geis, and all of the fall season coaches and players, including Kutztown football. It is incredible accomplishment that you could run a sports season in the middle of a pandemic and have no positive cases and so very few quarantine issues and healthcare situations.
And I think we're one of the only schools that had that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And they won the sportsmanship award while doing that, so kudos on that too. Yeah. We need some good news, right? Top 10. Having said that, and I am, as all of you know, a strong advocate of sports and extracurriculars and fully understand the huge incremental value that those activities provide in so many ways and so many levels. Having said that, winter sports, to me, look very different than fall sports. Winter sports are indoor, and I'm going to caveat swimmers, knock yourself out, swim all you want, because there's pretty good scientific research that suggests chlorine kills COVID. So I'm not particularly concerned about our swimmers' health and safety as they compete or train. The other sports, hoops and wrestling, I'm trying to picture basketball players, face guarding, boxing out, rebounding, shooting foul shots, which clearly is in 6 feet apart. I'm trying to picture wrestlers wrestling, grabbing each other to take them down, escaping from grips. How does that occur without sharing air? We know that COVID is an airborne virus. The wrestlers work super hard, as do the basketball players, but often they probably share sweat in addition to air. Can you talk to us about how we can do that safely? What incremental process, procedure is going to be put in place to keep those athletes, the coaches, the staff, visiting players safe in our facilities?
And honestly, that's where this statement comes into play. It's really frustrating when you don't have those guidelines coming, and they're just saying start sports. So I think what Mr. Geis has done is put together that layered approach to how are we going to handle it. And admittedly, to play sports, and those sports in particular, there is going to have to be close contact, and that's how you play the game. But we can put together all the safety protocols with masks and disinfectants and all those things, practices and all those other events to ensure the best to our ability that we can maintain that safety for our kids and our coaches.
And I can't speak for wrestling, but I mean, volleyball is playing in similar kind of proximity. I mean, granted, you do have a net there, but you have everybody on the team all within 6 feet of each other, crisscrossing, moving across each other. And then once you get to the net, it's a jousting match because you've got, 3 girls going up against 3 girls. And volleyball went off without a pitch this fall. So, I mean, that is a 100% indoor sport that, the tiered kind of layered approach worked out very well.
Just so you're clear, I mean, we developed this athletic health and safety plan separate from the school health and safety plan that was put in place when Mr. Geist,
July 1 was when it was implemented.
St. Luke's identifies certain types of sports, low, medium, high risk, and you identified 2 particular sports that I believe are high risk sports, basketball. And so I think we understand that these are high risk sports. We understand that there is a higher possibility that transmission can occur. okay? I think we have a tiered approach that says, this is what we'll do, and there is a large potential that if someone's gonna get COVID, it's gonna be probably one of the sports because of the nature of the sports, okay? So I think the health and safety plan is set in a way that says, yeah, we're aware, and then ultimately, we as parents and people who are in that sport need to make that decision if they feel comfortable within that sport, if they want to participate. We have specific guidelines that say, hey, listen, you understand this is a higher risk sport, there's a higher potential for infection here. You as a student, you as a parent, need to make that decision on your own, whether or not you feel that that's worth it within this pandemic. That's how I kind of look at it, because personally, I might have an issue. I have kids that are wrestlers. I might look at it differently than another parent, And I think individually, each parent and student needs to make that decision as a unit on whether they're willing to take that risk or not. That's how I look at it, and that's how I get myself around that, because I have a child that's not into a very high risk sport.
Right.
And it's a decision that we are coming to grips with as well.
Yeah,
So
I appreciate that. Here's where I struggle with the logic of that. As an individual parent, you can make that choice for your child, and 100% that is your right. But based on what we've been talking about all night long, it's an issue of community spread. And if your wrestler, let's just take your wrestler as an example, ends up catching COVID or bringing COVID into the building, then any other high school family or middle school, if there's middle school wrestling, every other high school or middle school family is now impacted by the fact that the board made that available and that you as a parent chose to put your kid in that situation. So for me, that's what I'm wrestling, no pun intended, sorry. That's what I'm really struggling with in terms of the logic, because I want your boys to be able to wrestle, and I want the girls and the boys on the field.
I don't know if I want my boys to wrestle.
Well, but I do, like,
Just so you understand.
high level, I do. I want our kids to be able to play. I totally get it. I want them to have every opportunity. I want the jugglers to be able to try and juggle. But in doing so, does that mean as a board that we are prioritizing sports over academics? We've spent 3 weeks spending hours and listening to the community say, we need to get back to school full in. And so I wonder if saying yes to sports doesn't fly in the face of that request. We've been so accommodating, trying to bend over backwards and find a way to get our kids as much academic in-person time as possible. Yet consciously, we would be saying yes to tonight's plan unless sports is pulled out separately on this vote. And if we support that, then we are putting so much of this work potentially at risk. And so, again, I'm completely torn, because I want it desperately for those athletes and coaches and families, and I can't make logic out of, well, then if we do that, we're putting this whole thing at risk.
I don't necessarily know if I agree with that, just from the simple fact of, we can look at things and they can do things in a way, like with wrestling. We've got, how many kids on the wrestling team?
10 right now.
We have 10 kids on the wrestling team, so we're falling underneath of that 10 limit. I'm not sure if you know any wrestlers. I mean, specifically, I'm going to use the 2 wrestlers at Senate Eagles. Those 2 individuals are high-level wrestlers. These are young men that monitor their weight. They monitor how much food they put in. They monitor how much they're lifting weights. They go to practice. They go to extra practice. These are state-level wrestlers. So these aren't the type of individuals that are going to be going anywhere near anything that's going to possibly expose them to something that would jeopardize them playing their sport and being able to make it to that state level again this year. One of the concerns that we heard in the emails was, hey, I'm worried that the college coaches aren't going to be looking at my child, right? And in some instances, this is gonna be the only opportunity that they're gonna have to continue their education or continue their education at a much higher level because they're gonna have access to this stuff. If we had, 100-guy wrestling team, which I don't know if anybody has a 100-guy wrestling team, but let's say they do, right? If we had a 100-guy wrestling team, I think it would be a different situation, but, with 10 people, we're falling under the limit of what gatherings are allowed to be per the DOH, right? Because they're saying keep limit groupings to under 10. So, I think in that situation, yeah, you are going to be rubbing up against another person, because that's what wrestling is. But again, these are kids that are used to monitoring what they're doing and doing it in a healthy way.
And I look at it like you were saying, Liz, with the transmission rate with VCTC. So we're fully remote at this point. The athletes come back. There is going to be very low transmission rate to the community as far as how basketball will be set up. Soccer started, it was just a couple kids together in pods. So they aren't all practicing together to begin with. So that starts out as the first phase. The second phase, you introduce a little longer time. So if we find that in those initial first phases that kids are doing, contracting or getting COVID, obviously we got to shut it down. But with that being said, I'm looking at it the same way I'm looking at VCTC. They're not going to be bringing it back to school because school is not in session. It'll be those small pods the first week, right, Mr. Geist? And then it goes into the second week. And then the third week, before you even start thinking about going out and wrestling other schools or having practice with another school or whatever. So, I'm like you also. I'm up in the air with that, but I'm looking at it that way as far as the transmission rate should be very, very low. And if we find that in the first week, someone gets it, well, unfortunately, we may not be able to have that sport. Is that correct, Mr.
Yes, yeah. I don't, like you all, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what it's going to look like 3 weeks from now.
Right.
Back to one of your points earlier, I think using this level of approach where we start off with the pods, small groups, focusing more on conditioning individual skills and working our way into more of that group activity, and then eventually getting to a point where we can have full practices and competitions. I think by following this plan, it gives, for lack of a better word, hope. Because that's what I think our athletes are looking for at this point. They're looking for, can I have this opportunity? I want this opportunity, but we may not be right there where we're going to play games right now. But this process provides a little bit of hope that if we stick to the plan and we do the things that we need to do by wearing a mask, social distancing, and all those other things, that the hope is we can get to that point where we can compete. I'll be honest with all of us. I don't know if we're there right now, today. But if we're given that opportunity, we can start with this plan and put this plan in action with that goal in mind.
I would guess that the kids are going to be very careful and cautious because they don't want to jeopardize their season. So my thought is that if we don't offer this opportunity, they're going to go elsewhere, whether it be their club team or Lancaster has a league or whatever. If we don't offer the opportunities, they'll find it somewhere. And then you're bringing lots of other stuff into our community.
I appreciate that. Very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I do hope that should the athletes and club activity kids be supported in their initiatives, that they take the risk very, very seriously. Yeah. And they've proven in the fall season that they should. I think the incremental challenges around winter sports, and I thought about volleyball too. I played, John, so I'm well aware of how the ball flows and how the movement goes. At the net, you've got blockers. That's about as close as you get. when you play basketball, you are literally touching people, and we all know that when you wrestle, you're essentially melding into one human being. And then, you know, you get the win. So thank you, that's helpful. And again, confidence in you, Mr. Geist, to lead the coaches and the staff and the kids in a healthy direction should we go forward with that. All right, thank you. Again, I would just ask, so there's timelines put on that slide. There was one that said December 14th about competitions. I would just ask that the board be consistently updated in terms of what the status of our sports program is. It's great to get these numbers now about the full season. I would hope that maybe we could get, as part of the weekly update or at least once a month board meeting, that we get a status update of here's what it looks like.
We did in all this.
Okay.
On the weekly updates we got, you know, what's the status of our sports, have there been any issues? Some of the issues with the middle school child, and those were placed in weekly updates, so I would anticipate we'll continue doing that.
All right, working through the list, a couple more quick things. So there's no mention of students with special needs in this plan, so IEP kids. And we frankly heard a good bit through email from families and moms and dads who might fall in that category. Can you just reassure us about what, as it relates to this plan, where those children fall?
So fair enough. The IEP students would be similar to what our current hybrid plan is. They would be afforded the opportunity to come in all 4 days, regardless of their cohort. That way we can ensure they're meeting their IEP.
And even though we're virtual, those kids still get their 4 days of support.
Virtual, the only students that are coming in virtual are our low incidence life skills and autism students.
Can you just say that again for me, please?
The only students in full virtual right now that are in school are our low incident life skills and autistic support students. Because of the challenges with working.
Okay.
But when we go to hybrid, all students with an IEP would be afforded that opportunity to come in all 4 days.
Okay, thank you. So, staff, bus drivers, should we go back to hybrid as per this model? Even though, I mean, again, the data today would suggest we shouldn't be in hybrid. But if we were to do that come January 11th, do we have very clearly articulated guidelines around quarantine procedures?
For our staff and students?
Yeah, so once a case is identified, that like in terms of siblings and in terms of bus riding and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely, that's been communicated to our students, that's on our website. And then if there's any cases that come up, again, our nurses work directly with the families to ensure that there is that clear guidance.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And that's enforced how? Like who's in charge of enforcing that?
Between the nurses and then the building level principals manage that.
Okay, but if Johnny, who's Susie's little brother, goes to get on the school bus that morning and quarantine's not over, who's stopping Johnny from getting on the school bus? The school nurse isn't.
No, we would deal with that when they got into school at that point.
Okay, but in that case, that Johnny has potentially now infected anybody on that school bus.
Correct, and so that's why it's important that we work with the families ahead of time to make sure that they know what's going on. And that's what the nurses have done. We haven't had any cases of that at all.
Okay, all right. It just,
Before you go on, quick,
yes,
in the committee meeting, the nurse that was here had brought up for all the people on YouTube and whatever else is listening, even when we're in red, the nurses want them to call in and let them know if you have a case, potential case, whatever's going on in your household that involves COVID, you should still call the nurse. She made that very clear in the committee meeting, and I just wanted to put that out there. You brought up nurses, and I just remembered it. Sorry for interrupting you.
No, not at all.
Great point, David.
It may be a good point to continue to reiterate to the community. We've done a good job in my assessment of, as we have a case, reminding folks about how to stay safe. But I think it might also be an opportunity to remind them about what David just said. Do we require a negative test before we allow a previously COVID positive person, whether it's a student or an adult, to come back into our building?
We do not.
Was there any consideration to that?
The reason that we don't is, it's similar to the fact that even if they're quarantining, if a student or staff member are quarantining due to close contact, and they go get a positive test, they have to quarantine for the 14 days regardless, even if it's a negative test. So Mr. Tomas and I could be in close contact, and I could be identified as being in close contact and have to quarantine for 14 days. I can get a test, and even if it's negative, I can take a test every single day and be negative. I still have to quarantine for 14 days.
Okay.
So because of that and the timeline, that's what we rely on the timeline. Also the medical doctors that are working when there is a positive case with that family.
Okay.
I think we need to, I think that needs to be spelled out to our student athletes. I've heard in other school districts, there have been problems with that.
Okay.
You know, student athletes have tested positive. They went, you know, a week later, got a negative test, and they wanted to return. And, you know, you're not allowed to. You've got to be quarantined for 14 days from the day of your positivity test. So just so our student athletes understand that, you can't come back just because you got a negative test 6 days later or 5 days later. You've got to be out for 14 days.
And that happened with some of the statistics we put out there with the students this season. Right. They had to quarantine for the 14 days. Yep.
I just wanted to let it.
And it's the importance of the quarantine and the close contact and following all these procedures, because it's pretty serious what you have to do with the quarantine mode.
I just know in 2 other schools in Berks County it happened, and there was big problems.
Okay, a couple more suggestions, if you will, in terms of policy enforcement and strictness. And again, for me, it seems completely counterintuitive that we would be seriously considering a looser, less restrictive plan in a time when COVID cases are skyrocketing. So with that in mind, it seems to me that at minimum, we should be considering putting in incremental safety procedures or protocols. We heard on one of the Zoom calls, board meetings, that there was eating happening on school buses. Do we have a policy in place to minimize the incident of that? Because to eat, you gotta take off your mask. Eating and drinking. Is that something that was considered either by the committee or by the administration at any point recently?
We have heard anecdotal evidence of people saying that they had seen people doing one-off things. I mean, I think that falls on the bus driver to kind of, it's just like we would expect a teacher to maintain control in their classroom. The bus driver's got to maintain control of the bus as well. But I don't know how widespread something like that evidence really is, because again, we're getting anecdotal evidence. It's not like a widespread thing.
I don't think we put that on the bus driver though, to see if some kids eating in the back of the bus. I don't think we can do that. So they gotta watch the road.
And there's rules and processes in place. There's not systematic failure here. So rules and processes are going on the bus. At some point, the only other adult on the bus is the bus driver. And so that would fall on the bus driver, just like the behavior side of it. But it's not a systematic failure where every single student's taking their lunches and everyone's, taking masks off and everyone's chowing down and eating their lunch on the way home. That's not happening. So
They're still pretty spaced out on the buses.
they're
so-
spaced out,
So
yeah.
it's not a whole lot different, while I'm comfortable taking my children on the bus, but it's no different than like my students eat my classroom. They're spaced out, their masks are off, they're all leaving. So I look at it that it's not that different, they're just on wheels going somewhere. I don't encourage it, but I can reason that if, hopefully don't do it, but it's a lot to ask the driver to sort of monitor that and not crash.
Yeah, I mean, I would fully echo what Mr. Bieber and Mrs. Henry are saying in terms of that's not a fair responsibility to ask the bus driver to enforce. Far more important to watch the road and to be safe driving. But again, I would just, little simple steps to remind kids as they get on the bus, no eating and drinking, Johnny. Keep your mask on, like, could make the difference between, in a community substantial risk, community spread environment, it could make the difference between whether we can keep kids in school or not and whether we can keep them safe or not. We also, along the way, have suggested the possibility of investing in an assistant on the school buses, maybe particularly buses that are running younger kids, elementary runs, to help ensure that the bus driver can keep his or her eyes on the road. So again, I don't know if that's something that anybody else would be willing to consider. I certainly would. I think the last thing is just, I have a note about substitute teachers. So when we look at competitive data, I know Exeter Township, Exeter School District is having a board meeting tonight. Their superintendent is recommending going fully virtual, coming up soon through the, leading into the holiday, the Christmas holiday, in part because of the skyrocketing COVID cases, and in part because the resulting impact on that school system is that they've got tons of teachers who are sick. Can you give us a quick update on how are we doing with staff, not just COVID cases, but just generally staff mental health, staff, absenteeism, the ability for us to acquire acceptable substitute teachers and that kind of thing?
So from the substitute teacher lens, we've made some very good strategic decisions from the onset of this, where we put in place building substitutes that are with us on a daily basis. So we have three in the middle school, 2 in the high school, and 2 in the elementary school. So those staff members are ours. We don't have to worry about them going and taking another job because they're ours. So that helps us, it buffers us. And the reason we did that was exactly the fear of what's happening now. So we had that backup plan in place, and they were trained and went through all the professional development so that they know how to teach, and it's not just pulling someone off the street. So I feel really good about where we are. Yes, there's absolutely some shortages out there. That's impacting school districts, and some school districts are even having to close because they can't get the substitutes unrelated to COVID. So maybe direct, maybe indirectly, but unrelated to COVID cases or quarantine. So that's absolutely a reality. But for us, at this point, we're in a good position. In terms of the staff, I'll say it again, I said in the presentation, our staff has been phenomenal. Whether that's our custodians, cleaning, our paraprofessionals, our teachers have went above and beyond. They have just been awesome in terms of thinking about it from the teacher lens, all those different transitions that have happened through the fall until now. And every time they just pick up, they go again. And just, I always say we're a family, and I truly believe that as a family, we have been working together for what's best for our kids. And that is all our staff and the administrative team as well. These folks have tirelessly continued to rebound, put different plans in place, and have done a phenomenal job of keeping their staff in a good position, whether that is the teachers or their support staff. They have continued to be the champions of the messaging we want as a school district, which is we're heading in the right direction. We're a team. We're in this together. How do we solve the problems as a collaborative bunch? And I can't say enough about all our staff members. It has gotten us to the point where we're at. We're in an excellent position.
That's great.
If I can share one more piece from the lens of substitute teachers, as you talked before about supports to families, we've been able to use all of our building substitutes on days when they're not covering classes to work one-on-one with students or small groups with students. So there's not just a value add on days where we need those teachers in the classroom. We're able to really use them to work with struggling students that you brought up before. So again, thank you for providing us the opportunity for those extra enhancements.
We, and maybe I didn't see this in the virtual plan. Case in point, however many years ago when we had that freak snowstorm and we had widespread power outages. What is the plan there?
So we've actually had that a couple times already. This morning there was some power outages and there was some, like a couple days ago. It was not virtual.
First day of virtual.
What we've done is we sent a message out to the families at the end of that day saying that all student absences will be forgiven that day. The reason we do it afterwards is obviously if we do it beforehand, you're going to have some kids that probably aren't going to log on. So at the end of the day, a message goes out that says, and that kid could have been sick, that could have been whatever, but we're just blanketly covering everyone as okay. Okay. That way we can forgive that. Okay. That miss. Because yeah, that is the reality.
Are there any snow days this year?
So, yeah, actually, that's a very good point. So snow days, if we end up back on this hybrid plan in January, what I plan on doing for snow days is calling and saying we're going to be, everyone's going to be virtual that day, and it's an easy transition. So there'll be snow days this year. Yeah, to your point. They're sleeping in either. There's snow days.
I think it is maybe an important point to note that as it relates to technology, for Brandywine families and students were positioned really, really well when this pandemic hit back in March and then all through this process. I know many other school districts were not positioned one-to-one, and we have been for years. Is that Mr. Hefner, former board president in the audience? Back in the day, when you sat up here, we implemented one-to-one technology. So I just, again, kudos to the team for having the foresight to implement and execute on that years ago, well in advance of an environment like this that we never could have anticipated. So, good job. So my final question for my colleagues on the board, is there anyone who has an appetite for modifying the motion to split it into pieces? Or am I the only one who would desire to vote individually on each of the items on the agenda?
If you want to vote on BCTC and sports separate, I'm all in favor of that. If that's what you want to do, I'm fine with that. I don't think we need to vote down one by one. But if you want to pull out BCTC and athletics and vote on them separately,
I would propose we vote on the data piece separately as well.
We're not voting on the plans, the hybrid plans. That's not 12 separate.
But that one might vote it all separately, because you only have two.
The modified hybrid plan is here.
I recommend we keep it.
Yeah.
As one myself.
Actually, I'm gonna vote.
Oh, that's just, I'm sorry, that's.
Yeah, I would just point out to my colleagues that the motion as it stands is one complete motion. It's not subbed out into various subpoints. It was just presented as motion A. So board reports 1A.
And as a point of clarification, the reason it was set up is working with our legal support team. We presented both models, individual and this, and the advice was this is the cumulative recommendations from the team that you do it in one shot.
okay,
That's why
I'm fine with that too.
Okay, thank you for considering that. Makes my vote that much more difficult.
Okay, we're gonna go, listen, anything else?
No, I think I've asked more than my fair share of questions, and you all have been very patient with me, so I appreciate that fact. Thank you very much.
Anybody?
So we move on to public comments. I'd ask anyone who is willing to speak, please stand up and make yourself known, what township you're from, and give us about 5 minutes, please, if you don't mind.
Good evening, my name is Ken Hefner, I'm from Rockland Township. I know from past experience that one of the hardest things that the board has to consider every year is the budget. And I'm wondering, since this happened in March, and your budgets are usually approved, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in June, whether or not you certainly couldn't have considered all the possibilities here that could happen with this pandemic and what additional expenses you might have been having to budget for. So my question tonight is there enough contingency in this year's school budget to cover all these items which you may or may not have to do? I'm assuming that there could be some savings in the busing if the buses aren't running, but then again, if the buses are running 2 trips for kindergarten and first elementary, that you have additional expenses there, plus the broadband if you decide that you have to go to that, for some examples. So my basic question is, how does the budget look? Do we have enough contingency to cover everything? Thank you.
Excellent question, Mr. Hefner. You haven't had a chance to meet our new business manager, but here's a new business manager. Mr. Diamond has joined us about 1.5 years ago. He's actually been tracking all the COVID-related expenses to date. I hate to put you on the spot, Mr. Diamond. Do you remember what a rough number that is to date?
Well, I think if I can, I'll just recap a little bit. At our regular November board meeting a couple weeks ago, I gave a brief budget update in that meeting. The districts, we have incurred extra costs related to this. We just wrapped up our prior fiscal year, so the fiscal year that ended on June 30th of 2020. We did see some pretty significant savings there due to the school shutdown in the spring. We also have been fortunate to receive quite a few one-time grant funds from both federal and state sources to help offset some of our extra costs related to the pandemic. And the other piece of good news, while again, no crystal ball, but looking at our revenue collections to this point through whether it be real estate taxes or earned income taxes, to this point in the fiscal year, we are not seeing a huge drop off, related to the current economic situation. So, I don't have numbers in front of me at this moment. Board's okay. My summary would be we're fortunate that the current board and prior boards have set us up well financially. We do have a healthy fund balance, and also all indications at this point, we're doing okay, and we've been able to maintain. And based on forecasted expenditures, we can't do this forever, but at this point on November 17th, I'm feeling okay about this fiscal year. We're just about ready to break into the budget cycle for next year, and we'll continue to monitor the situation. And it's always a challenge pulling the next year's budget together, but we'll see how that goes.
I think one of the key pieces is that what you mentioned, that one-time grant that we've been able to receive through the CARES fund, that has really offset most of our expenses to date. So I think to your point, we're good now and not sustainable forever, but at this point, that funding has absolutely helped. Great summary, Mr. Bennett. Thank you.
Mr. Hefner, I'm not sure if you've been keeping up with everything, but we've also, with the financing that we've done for the projects that we're doing on the buildings, we were able to position ourselves with some savings there as well. So I feel confident saying that, we're doing our best to be fiduciarily responsible and not overspend. But I don't see this being a huge impact on us. Like, we're not going to go back to the budget meetings like we had back, 10 years ago.
I just recall Mrs. Cross did an excellent job as our business manager back in the days, and she was constantly financing wherever she could. And I'm looking forward to what she said about 5, 6, whenever she was here yet. But she said by 2021, 2022, maybe you people will actually get a tax break instead of a tax increase on your property taxes. So I'm afraid that may or may not happen based on the current events or what have you, but I would encourage all of you to try to make Mrs. Krause's dreams come true. Thank you.
Mr. Nyman's doing a wonderful job trying to help keep that dream a reality. No promises, but we're working on it. We're trying our best, Mr. Hefner.
Understood. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, sir.
Okay, any other public comment? Okay. That brings us to roll call.
Mr. Bieber,
Yes.
Mrs. Eisenhart? Yes. Mrs. Henry? Yes. Mrs. Hume?
No.
Mr. Sheets?
Yes.
Mr. Wagaman?
Yes.
Mrs. Walliser? Yes. Mr. Chouwaki?
Yes.
7 yeas, 1 nay, motion passes.
Okay. Move to adjournment, motion for adjournment.
So moved. Second.
Meeting adjourned at 8:25.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time this evening.